The studio was electric with tension. Bright lights bore down on the two figures at the debate table, their every expression captured by cameras broadcasting live to millions. Karoline Leavitt sat with a composed posture, her hands lightly folded, in front of her. Across from her sat Alan Brooks, a well-known journalist famous for his sharp, relentless questioning. Their discussion had already been intense, filled with fiery exchanges over policy, government leadership, and the direction of the country. Viewers at home were glued to their screens watching as Karoline confidently pushed back against Alan's challenges. But then, the debate took an unexpected turn. Alan leaned forward, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. His tone shifted from political analysis to something more personal. "Karoline," he said, pausing for effect, "you speak a lot about values, tradition, and leadership. But let's be honest. Why do you still push faith in a time when science has already given us all the answers?" The question landed like a thunderclap. For a brief moment, the air in the studio felt heavier. The audience members shifted in their seats. Even the host, who had tried to stay neutral throughout the discussion, looked up with widened eyes. This was no longer a conversation about policy. This was something deeper. Carolina didn't flinch. She didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, she let the weight of the question settle. Her expression remained steady. Her eyes locked onto Alan's. It was clear he expected her to stumble, to fumble for words, maybe even backpedal, but she did none of those things. Across the country, people leaned in, waiting. The debate had been trending online for hours, but now engagement skyrocketed. Clips of this moment were already being recorded and shared. Social media was alight with speculation. Would she dodge the question? Would she deflect? Or would she say something that no one saw coming? As the tension thickened, Karoline finally spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, but carried the weight of conviction. What she said next would not only leave Alan Brooks speechless, but would send shockwaves through the nation. It was the kind of response that people would debate, praise, and dissect long after the cameras stopped rolling. Alan Brooks didn't rush his words. He leaned in just slightly, just enough to make it clear that this was the moment he had been waiting for. His voice was smooth, controlled, almost casual, but the challenge in his tone was unmistakable. "Karoline, let's be real," he said, letting the words sink in before continuing. "Faith is just an outdated crutch. Science has replaced it. Why do you still push religion?" For a second, there was silence. Not the kind that happens when people lose interest, but the kind that makes everyone sit up a little straighter. The audience wasn't just watching anymore, they were hanging on every word. Even the moderator, who had been carefully balancing neutrality all night, seemed to sense that something bigger than politics was unfolding. Alan leaned back, crossing his arms, his expression one of quiet confidence. He had seen this play out before. This was the part where his opponent would scramble for an answer, maybe throw out some vague argument about morality or tradition. Maybe she'd get defensive, maybe she'd deflect. Either way, he was ready to shut it down. But Karoline didn't rush to respond. She didn't fidget, didn't blink, didn't even look unsettled. She just looked at him, calm and sure, as if she had been expecting this all along. Then, instead of rattling off statistics or quoting religious texts, she did something no one saw coming. She told a story. She didn't start with an argument. She didn't try to debate facts or logic. She just spoke, her voice steady and clear. "I once met a man who had everything," she began. "Wealth, success, influence. He had spent his whole life chasing what the world told him mattered. Money, power, knowledge. He was the kind of person who believed in facts and reason in science. He didn't think he needed faith, he thought he had all the answers." The room was dead silent. But then, something happened, she continued. Something he couldn't control. Something science couldn't explain. And in that moment, when everything he had built for himself wasn't enough, he started searching for something more. Her words were deliberate, each one carrying weight. She wasn't just answering a question. She was painting a picture, drawing everyone in, making them feel it. Alan's smirk was gone. The audience had forgotten to shift in their seats. The entire room was hanging on her next words. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't fired back with anger or frustration. But somehow, without even finishing her story yet, she had already changed the tone of the entire debate. Karoline let her words settle, giving the silence room to breathe. The weight of Margaret's story hung in the air, unshaken by statistics, logic, or debate tactics. The audience, which had been so lively moments ago, sat frozen. Even Alan, usually so eager to challenge, remained quiet. She looked directly at him, her voice steady but soft. "I once met a woman named Margaret. She lost everything in a car accident. Her husband, her 2 children, gone in an instant. No warning, no time to say goodbye. One moment they were laughing together in the car. The next she was alone." Karoline paused, watching Alan's expression shift slightly. It wasn't much, just the smallest flicker in his eyes. But she caught it. She could have let that moment define her. She could have given up, cursed the world, blamed God, and you know what? No one would have faulted her for it. But instead, do you know what she told me when I met her? She let the question hang for a second before answering, it herself. God is still good. A few audience members exhaled sharply. Someone in the back shifted in their seat. But otherwise the studio remained silent. Alan tilted his head slightly, skeptical but not dismissive. And what exactly does that prove? Karoline gave a small, almost knowing smile. It doesn't prove anything, she admitted. Not in the way you want. It won't fit in a research paper. It won't convince a scientist. But that's not the point. She glanced toward the camera, as if speaking to more than just Alan now. Faith isn't about proof, she said. It's about what keeps you going when proof doesn't exist. For the first time since the debate started, Alan didn't have a quick response. He simply watched her, waiting, as if trying to find the flaw in her argument. Karoline leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Tell me, Alan, what would you say to Margaret?" He blinked, caught off guard. "What? If you were sitting across from her after she buried her entire family, what would you tell her?" She kept her tone gentle, but her words pressed forward, demanding an answer. "Would you tell her that her pain is just chemicals in her brain? That her grief is simply neurons firing? That she should just accept life as a series of random events and move on?" Alan's jaw tightened, but he still didn't speak. Karoline nodded, as if she already knew his answer. "You wouldn't," she said, "because deep down we all know that people need something more than logic when they're hurting. Science can tell us why tragedy happens, but faith helps people survive." She sat back, giving Alan space to respond. But for the first time that night he had nothing to say. She continued, her voice steady but gentle. "When people go through suffering, they don't turn to equations or textbooks. They cry out for something bigger than themselves. Margaret had every reason to give up, but faith gave her strength, it gave her hope, and that's what keeps people going even when life makes no sense." Alan exhaled, rubbing his jaw. It was a rare moment. He was usually so quick with rebuttals, always ready to challenge any argument. But now he looked at Karoline with something different in his eyes. Not agreement, but something closer to understanding. She didn't push further. She let the weight of the moment speak for itself. The silence stretched on, not awkward but full. The audience wasn't shifting in their seats anymore. They weren't waiting for the next jab or counterpoint. They were listening, and Alan, for once, had nothing to say. Alan shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie as if trying to regain control of the moment. He wasn't used to being thrown off balance, but something about Karoline's response had left him with fewer options than usual. Still, he wasn't going to back down. "That's just personal experience," he said, his voice sharper now. "Emotion, not evidence." Karoline didn't even blink. She simply tilted her head slightly, watching him, almost as if she had expected that response. Then she leaned in just enough to close the space between them, her voice calm but firm. "Neither is hope," she said, but we still hold on to it. Alan opened his mouth, then hesitated. Karoline continued, her tone unwavering. When a child is trapped under rubble after an earthquake, and the rescue workers shout, "Don't give up, we're coming for you," is that just blind emotion? Alan exhaled, sitting back. He didn't answer right away, or, Karoline pressed, when a doctor tells a cancer patient to keep fighting, even when the odds are against them, should we scoff and say, "That's not evidence, that's just emotion"? Alan rubbed his fingers together, thinking. He clearly wanted to counter, but something about her argument had thrown him off balance. Karoline let the silence sit for a moment before continuing. "No one asks for proof when they're desperate," she said. "No one demands a scientific study when they're on their knees praying their loved one makes it through the night. In those moments, people don't need charts or graphs, they need faith. And that's not weakness, that's being human." Alan took a slow breath, choosing his next words carefully. "You're mixing two different things," he said finally. "Faith and false hope." Karoline smiled slightly. "False hope?" she repeated. "Tell that to the mother who sat outside the hospital room for days, begging God to save her son and then watched him walk out alive." Alan's jaw clenched. He was trying to hold on to his argument, but Karoline wasn't making it easy. She leaned back slightly, giving him space, but her voice stayed steady. "I get it," she said. "You want everything to fit into logic and reason. But life doesn't work like that. Science explains a lot, but it doesn't explain why people fight for miracles. It doesn't explain why humans throughout history have reached for something greater than themselves. And it certainly doesn't explain why, in the darkest moments, faith has carried people further than reason ever could." Alan tapped his fingers against the desk, clearly weighing his response. He was never one to be at a loss for words, but something about this conversation had shifted. The audience was still hanging on every word. The energy in the room had changed. This wasn't just another debate anymore, it was something deeper, something that had moved beyond talking points and rehearsed arguments. Alan inhaled, looking at Karoline with a mixture of frustration and curiosity. "So, you're saying faith is necessary?" he said slowly. "Even if it's not true?" Karoline didn't hesitate. "I'm saying faith gives people something that science never will." Alan studied her, trying to find the weak spot in her argument. But the problem was she wasn't giving one. She had turned the debate into something more than facts and figures, and now, for the first time in his career, Alan Brooks wasn't sure how to win. The host, sensing that something rare was happening, shifted in his seat and looked toward Alan. The usual back and forth of a debate had vanished, replaced by something heavier, something real. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Alan, do you have a response?" The room was silent. The audience, the crew, even those watching at home. It was as if everyone was holding their breath. Alan, the seasoned journalist, who always had a comeback, who prided himself on never being caught off guard, just sat there. His hands were folded in front of him. He blinked a few times, processing. Normally, he would have jumped at the chance to dismantle an argument, to poke holes, to redirect. But this time he hesitated. Finally, he exhaled and leaned slightly forward, his voice quieter than before. "I need to think about that." The words weren't dramatic. They weren't some grand concession. But in that moment, they were more powerful than any argument he could have made. The room stayed silent for another second before the host, clearly sensing the gravity of what had just happened, nodded. He turned to Karoline, who simply watched Alan with a calm, knowing expression. She wasn't gloating, she wasn't pressing further. She had said what she needed to say, and now the moment belonged to him. Then just like that, the segment ended. The cameras cut, and the debate was over. But the conversation, that was just beginning. Within hours, the internet exploded. The clip of Alan Brooks, the man known for his sharp takedowns, pausing in front of millions of viewers, went viral. Headlines blared across news sites. Karoline Leavitt stuns atheist journalist into silence. Social media was flooded with reactions. Some cheered Karoline's words, calling her response a masterclass in faith and reason. Others defended Alan, saying his hesitation was a sign of an open mind. But no one could deny it. The moment had struck a chord. Some said it was the first time they had ever seen Alan Brooks truly speechless. Others argued that it was proof that faith, no matter how debated, still had a place in the conversation. But one thing was clear: no one would forget what had just happened. As soon as the debate aired, the internet lit up. Social media feeds were flooded with clips, reactions, and debates of their own. People couldn't stop talking about what they had just witnessed. "I've never seen Alan Brooks speechless before," one viewer posted. "Karoline Leavitt just delivered one of the most powerful defenses of faith ever," another wrote. The moment spread like wildfire, not just among political commentators and religious groups, but across unexpected circles. People who normally argued over faith found themselves doing something different, reflecting. The usual back and forth, the usual dismissive tone from both sides, was missing. Instead, there was curiosity, thoughtfulness, a pause that felt unusual in a world that never stopped shouting. Some who considered themselves skeptics admitted they respected the way Karoline handled herself. Others who had drifted away from faith started wondering why they ever left it behind. Even those who had no strong opinions on religion found themselves thinking about the debate long after it ended. Then a few days later, Karoline received an email. It wasn't from a politician or a journalist. It was from an ordinary woman. Someone who had watched the debate from her living room, expecting just another argument on TV, but instead found something deeper. She wrote, "I haven't prayed in 20 years. I thought I was done with all that. But after watching that debate, I realized I missed believing." Karoline read the message twice, then again. Out of all the headlines, all the tweets, all the noise online, it was this simple email that stuck with her. It wasn't about winning a debate. It wasn't about proving a point. It was about something much bigger than that. Some moments don't just trend. They change people. And this, whether anyone expected it or not, was one of them. Karoline never stepped onto that stage with the goal of winning. She didn't need to. For her, this debate was never about proving someone wrong or making a point that would go viral. It was about speaking truth, plain and simple. As the days passed and the debate continued to make waves, Karoline was asked repeatedly if she expected this kind of reaction. Her answer was always the same: "I just shared what I believe." But belief, when spoken with conviction, does something powerful. It doesn't just challenge people, it makes them think. And that's exactly what this moment did. She ended her final statement in the debate with something simple: "If this conversation made you think, don't let it end here. Keep asking, keep searching." She wasn't asking people to agree with her. She wasn't demanding that they see the world exactly as she did. She was just urging them to look deeper. Because in the end, debates come and go. Arguments trend one day and disappear the next. But the real impact, the kind that lasts, doesn't come from proving a point. It comes from awakening something inside people. A question, a thought, a feeling they can't shake. And that's why this moment mattered. Not because it was dramatic, not because it went viral, but because for many it sparked something they hadn't felt in a long time.